I've been wanting to do a video related to pregnancy and professional identity for quite a while, but just didn't know sort of how to frame it in a way that would be most impactful for women who are experiencing the different chapters of their reproductive lives while also maintaining and developing their professional identity. But in my own life, I had found out recently that I was unexpectedly pregnant with my fourth child, and had a lot of thoughts around how this was going to affect my work and my professional trajectory, and things that I had planned for this stage of my life at 42, and realized that this was an opportunity, especially as it related to my own life, to share with those who follow my work some of the things that I've come across with my coaching of empathetic women leaders and also my research that really points to a very shared and oftentimes intense experience of being pregnant or trying to conceive or postpartum after maternity leave within one's professional identity, and balancing that in a way that's authentic and sustainable. So I wanted to talk about a couple of approaches that I've taken with my clients and also the ways in which this has come up in my research on the psychological safety of empathetic women leaders. So I realized first that this was a more broad experience across women in leadership through my doctoral dissertation on the psychological safety and interpersonal boundaries of Gen X and millennial clergy women. And in this context, in sort of church congregational life, expectations around clergy women's reproductive lives is extremely intense and very I would say, highlighted in ways that may not be practiced in other secular professions, but there are very much commonalities across all sectors where women in their reproductive lives find that they are balancing the responses and perceptions of other people around them with their own personal mental health and physical needs while being pregnant. So a couple of quotes that came out of this doctoral research are really impactful that I wanted to share here. One of them is that a woman who had a child already going into a very forward-facing leadership role and also considering with her partner whether to have more children, was basically feeling harassed by other people in her work environment, older women in particular, who were really scrutinized her about her reproductive choices. When are you going to have more children? Are you pregnant yet? Comments like this that perhaps in other professional spaces may really not be said, but there are pockets of professional life where these boundaries are permeable, where people feel that they can and will say comments like this to women of reproductive age. And this woman in her interview expressed a really powerful statement, which was she felt, why can't I just be human? Why can't I be a human in a human body that does regular human body things without everybody having an opinion or a judgment? And I thought that was really reflective of what a lot of women in their reproductive lives experience. It's a very private journey, but one that ultimately becomes extremely public and visible, especially later in one's pregnancy or when one needs to take time off after reproductive loss. So it's both a hyper-visibilized experience, but also one that's invisibilized, where women are going through this, particularly forward-facing women leaders are going through so many aspects of their reproductive lives while having to sort of maintain this facade of normal everyday routine while going through a lot of these changes and adjustments, both physically and mentally. I had other participants in this research who described the really difficult expectation to return to work as usual after either having a reproductive loss, a miscarriage, in one case a stillbirth, where one may have been given a brief period of bereavement, but there was also, especially later in pregnancy, kind of later term loss, the real need physically to recover, and that was not provided or offered. And one woman, in fact, her position was terminated because she said, I cannot physically or emotionally come back to work yet. She was given a brief 2-week bereavement after a stillbirth, and it was a very tragic loss for her and her partner. And I think that may seem as an extreme in a particular professional context, but I think women are dealing with this on a regular basis where, especially if it's a forward-facing role leading leading large groups of people, being public in leading conferences, or being sort of the face of an organization, going through those experiences that can be traumatic and also physically debilitating, and then expected to actually perform your job at the very same level, while not wanting to share all the details of these private experiences, can be very difficult. Other women experienced, in addition to invasive questions about, are you pregnant yet? When are you going to have your next child? Just the kind of physical touching and handling of pregnant women in their professional lives can be really unsettling. Some women may be comfortable with that. I would say in most cases, women are not. I think people have this inclination to want to sort of hold or touch, especially a pregnant belly, and it's really never appropriate to just assume that a woman is comfortable or okay with that. So that's something that women have to constantly be assessing their personal physical boundaries, especially once they are more visibly pregnant. So these are some of the things that I came across in my research, things that echoed very much aspects of what I've experienced in my own leadership career and history. And I'll share a little bit of that here in the sense that each of my pregnancies has been in a very different context and in ways that I negotiated these boundaries and these experiences while also being a forward-facing leader. My first pregnancy, I was, again, in a very public leadership role, leading an organization. I really tried to hide and invisibilize my experiences of being pregnant because I wanted to promote this sense of trust in my competence as a leader. And I felt, both personally and perhaps even absorbing cultural messages, that people would think I was less competent and less able if I was more sort of transparent about how I was feeling physically. But, leading meetings and having to feel like I was lightheaded or needing to hide snacks under the table. As a clergy woman, I eventually hid crackers in the pockets of my robe to get through worship services. And eventually in my second position in that role as a solo pastor, I did feel more comfortable being more transparent and honest about how I was feeling while being pregnant, because I no longer felt like it compromised my appearance of competence. I felt strong and confident in my leadership skills, that I felt like I could be honest about, look, I need to take a moment, let's take a pause in a meeting, etc. And that was fortunately embraced. I would say in my third pregnancy, it was much different. Having worked at the same organization where I was pregnant with my second, that became a really toxic and abusive work environment, and I eventually left. And then my husband and I had been wanting to have a third child, so I was pregnant during the recovery time after I left that toxic workplace. And that was a difficult time and space to be pregnant, where my body was going through a lot of intense changes while I was also emotionally recovering from a really abusive workplace environment. And that's a tough place to be in. It was very isolating. I experienced a lot of depression and anxiety during that time, while also being a parent of two small children. So it was a very, very difficult time. I think something that many women experience when they take what's known as the power pause. The power pause can be seen as generally positive, where women are deciding intentionally to leave a place of employment to be able to expand their family and have some more time for rest and shifting of priorities. But when that power pause comes from a place of having had to leave or resign from a position that was really abusive and toxic, it's not just a power pause, it's actually recovering from workplace and professional trauma. And that can have a very different impact on a pregnancy during that recovery period. So when I work with women leaders in a coaching capacity around some of these issues, there are some areas that I tend to focus on, and also based on the particular needs and unique circumstances of the woman herself. But I think one of the primary areas I like to address are the kinds of narratives that women ourselves are absorbing around reproductive health and pregnancy and the identities around that. And truthfully, under the surface, there's a lot of narratives of shame continued in our society today around women's reproduction and sexuality in general. And so when forward-facing women leaders are going through their reproductive lives more physically visibly as pregnant women, there can be these absorptions of feelings of shame, of not belonging, of having done something wrong, in particular for women later in their careers who may be experiencing unplanned pregnancies or unexpected surprise pregnancies. There's this feeling of embarrassment that many women can experience. But what's interesting is, in particular, in women in their 40s, and it's a demographic that I work with predominantly, late 30s, 40s, similar to my own age, is that unexpected pregnancies are extremely common. Um, about 4% of new births are of women who are in their 40s, and of those births, 75% are unexpected and unplanned. And this can really create this narrative of shame, of this was a mistake or this was unplanned. And I think really when we look at the common nature of that experience, it helps women to identify that they are not alone, they are not isolated, that they have agency and reproductive choices within those realities. So that's something that I primarily focus on, is when there are these experiences of shame or not belonging or having had made a mistake or this doesn't fit into my career trajectory, to really empower women to have agency and exercise those choices that they do have, and promote that in terms of replacing those societal narratives or internalized narratives of shame that women may carry in those circumstances. I also am a really strong proponent of mental health support, in addition to the kind of coaching that I do for women who have experienced reproductive loss or reproductive traumas throughout their reproductive lives, to really have a kind of mental health support team around them that can address those different layers of loss and grief. And I find that comes up a lot in my coaching work, but I tend to use my workspace with women as a way for women to develop strong narratives of self and identity moving forward, and that therapists can really work on some of those deeper layers of loss and grief. So I encourage women to take advantage of those different modalities. I think in general, one of the important things that I try to help women understand is this deep tension between the hypervisibility of pregnancy and reproductive life and the invisibilization of these experiences. And that alone creates this deep tension and just dissonance that women are carrying in their minds and their hearts and their bodies when they're in this stage of life. It's important also for my clients to develop a sense of these layered aspects of identity that pregnancy or reproductive loss or just struggles within that particular stage of life can really bring to the surface, are different layers of identity. And that can be a struggle in terms of women who have had a very successful career. Maybe taking that pause again to have a more caregiving role can create a lot of tension within one's own sense of self, and addressing the areas of life that one feels most empowered, one feels one has the most agency. And oftentimes in caregiving roles, people feel isolated. Women themselves feel unseen or invisibilized, which can be very difficult coming out of a more visible career space. It's important, as I mentioned, with some of the women that I researched, to really promote strong boundaries around one's physical space, in particular in those workspaces where one feels that people are at liberty wanting to come around and touch and feel and have comments about one's reproductive body, that it's an appropriate time to establish those strong boundaries and say things like, I'm not comfortable with you being that close to my physical body right now. It may feel awkward to say something like that to a work colleague, but the other alternative is to just swallow that and experience something that can feel deeply invasive. I also work with women to have embodied practices throughout these experiences where one is able to have feel more in tune to their somatic experiences. Somatic meaning the living body, that our bodies are constantly changing and evolving, and to be able to move through those shifts in ways that have a lot of self-compassion and patience, and also encouraging women to have that inner circle of people that they can be open and transparent with about those experiences, those who come to these conversations with no non-judgment, non-reactivity. That can be a really safe space for women to process these experiences. And I think an important element too is there's been such movement and expansion in the notion of women's strength through their reproductive lives, that it's not seen as a disability, that it's not seen as something that one needs to hide, and empowering women in their reproductive lives, which I very strongly agree with, yet at the same time, honoring the fact that this is an incredibly vulnerable time and space in women's lives. There's this need to shift priorities, oftentimes taking jobs that have less income and feeling less secure in one's financial independence. I think for myself, that was a big shift for me when I left my work as an ordained clergy. For the first time, I was not the primary wage earner in my family, and I was expecting my third child, and I did feel vulnerable. It was something I talked with my husband about. I think anytime someone switches from being a primary breadwinner to the person that's more in the domestic space can feel like a very big shift, and one that involves a lot of vulnerability. So balancing and understanding and embracing that balance between strength and vulnerability is something that I work with my clients with as well. Well, I hope this has been helpful. It's something that I feel really passionately about bringing to the surface, not only with my clients, but in my research and my writing, because I think it continues to be something that's invisibilized. And I really want to create those spaces where women can feel that, as my colleague in this research project said, that women can feel they can be human and in human bodies that do normal human body things without the scrutiny, the judgment, the expectations, the opinions of other people around them. So creating that safe space is a passion that I have. And if you experience any of the things that I've just mentioned, know that you are not alone and that there are people that will journey with you and support you through this. So thanks for listening. Learn more on my website at www.lynnhoran.com. And I hope you have a good day. Bye-bye.